Hello guys. So a few days ago I had a crazy idea. I thought, is it possible to beat Trackmania Nations Forever without steering, where beating the game counts as finishing every track in the campaign? Steering is something you'd think would be absolutely essential to complete any racing game, especially one with crazy things like loops, wall rides and big jumps. Would it even be possible to complete a single campaign track, let alone all 65? Well, I decided to give it a shot, but I quickly discovered that it wasn't very interesting. You see, Trackmania Nations Forever consists of only 4 buttons: accelerate, brake, left and right. Removing the ability to steer leaves you with only 2 buttons, accelerate and brake. This results in an absolute pinball fest of driving back and forth and hitting walls to realign the car to get past corners. I was able to complete the first 5 tracks of the game this way, but after that I decided to give up. I realized that there were a ton of impossible tracks coming later down the road, and it simply wasn't that interesting. To nobody's surprise really, the answer to the question, can you complete Trackmania Nations Forever without steering, is a clear no. But after trying my idea, I thought of a much more realistic challenge, and it's the one we'll explore in today's video. Can you beat Trackmania Nations Forever only steering in one direction? With the ability to steer, you would at least stand some chance against flat walls, loops, sharp turns and wall rides. The goal is to finish all 65 tracks in the game, from AO1 Race to EO5 Endurance, using only 3 keys, and perhaps even picking up a few medals along the way. I had no idea whether or not it was possible before starting the project, but that's what I sought to find out. The first thing I had to do was go to the input settings and choose my steering direction, left or right. I didn't really have any strategy or planning going into this, so I simply went with my gut feeling, and I decided I would be steering to the left. And then I started on my journey. The first 5 tracks were a breeze, as I was able to complete them without steering. Now being able to turn made things go way smoother. I was able to pick up the gold medal on AO3 and even the author medal on AO5, as these tracks go primarily towards the left. AO6 was the first track I had to get creative on. This track features a lot of jumps and obstacles, and not having the ability to steer in both directions here made it a challenge. I discovered that on the start you could do a little turnaround and line yourself up for the first series of jumps. Then, with a small lucky landing that changed my car's angle more to the right, I was able to dodge the following poles and make the jump thereafter. Since this was a right turn, my car hugged the outside wall here, and I had to get away from the wall and gather speed for the next jump, which luckily was possible with the speed I could gather. And after that, I could cruise to the finish. AO7 Race turned out to be interesting as well, because the map is basically one big boxed-in spiral that moves to the right. What I found out here is that I could turn around on the first jump, and when driving backwards, steering to the left would turn my car towards the right. Driving backwards in itself is very slow, but it paid off on AO7 since I didn't have to do a full turnaround on each corner. At the end, I turned back to driving forwards again, and I had enough speed to clear the finish jump. Next up was AO8 Endurance, which is a multi-lap track that turns to the right. But luckily it's connected all the way without any obstacles or jumps, so while it's very slow to drive, there wasn't any risk of not finishing. There are many campaign tracks like this that, while they're very slow to drive, you have an absolute guarantee of finishing, and since there isn't much interesting going on tracks like these, I won't be covering them in much detail. AO9 Race and A10 Acrobatic were both easy finishes after some tactical wall hits to realign the car towards where I needed it to go. On A11 I was again able to get the author medal since the track turns to the left. A12 is a map that turns only to the right, and my first idea was to hit one of these walls on the corner to realign my car towards the finishes. But then I realized that the A12 shortcut should still be possible with only steering to the left. Doing a tactical wallbang on the start, I got just enough angles that I could perform the shortcut by climbing over the checkpoint wall. And once I landed on the grass, I could cruise into the finish for an easy bronze medal. After that, A13, A14 and A15 all ended up being pretty easy finishes to close out the white series. A14 had an unavoidable wall crash in the start, but you could still do the shortcut on the dirt jump. Yet, there was actually a Trackmania player who failed the shortcut at a speedrun marathon last year.
Okay, alright,
That's a good parking spot though.
Good
Look
parking.
at that. Look at that. It's for free.
Alright, we're gonna go through. It's fine.
Who had the ability to go at full speed and to steer to the right. Very nice. Anyways, I noticed the author medal on this track was barely possible, so even after completing it, I kept playing for some 20 minutes, and I barely managed to snipe it. The green track started off nicely, with BO1, a slow but easy finish. On BO2, I first thought that I was going to get no medals, as I was over 4 seconds behind the bronze medal after the start. But then it went ahead and did this. We've all been there, boys, even the bronze medal. BO3 was another easy finish, but it was also looking very promising for medals, since the track only turns to the left. At the start of the track, there's a pole right ahead that you have to avoid, and through sheer luck I discovered it was possible to barely avoid it and also not touch the dirt fence. Next up was BO4 Acrobatic, which required some creativity. The track is just one big wall ride, and since I'm able to steer to the left, it's very easy to get the car into the wall ride. But after passing it, I was unable to get my car to angle towards the finish. I first tried to do a full 360-degree turn, and landing with an angle that would take me just between the road borders, but I eventually discovered something much better. By only steering 180 degrees, I could jump closer to the road entry and just drive backwards into the finish, getting a nice silver medal. On BO6, I got to see the bronze medal redeeming himself and pulling off some mad stunts near the end of the track. Just look at him go. BO7 and BO8 were both easy finishes that brought us over to BO9 Acrobatic. This is a very tricky map that requires you to switch from side to side on platforms, and the best strategy here was to clip the edge of the platform with the wheels and hope that you get an angle towards the next one, 3 times in a row. My best attempt here almost managed to beat the bronze medal, but I barely missed the finish on the last platform, clocking in at 22 seconds. B10 was another slow but guaranteed finish, and then we get to B11 Race. Going into it, I thought B11 was going to be easy as well, but boy was I wrong. In the middle of the track there is a turn to the right, followed by a drop down through 3 ring checkpoints which you have to collect in order to finish the track, and I could seemingly never get enough speed to collect the last one. But after a while, I realized that that in itself was the solution, to intentionally not get enough speed to reach the last ring directly, because then you could, with a bit of luck, bounce on the middle ring and get enough distance to reach the last one. And well, as it turns out, it worked perfectly. And after passing the ring, all that remained was cruising to the finish, and I had successfully completed the hardest track yet. B12, 13 and 14 were once again freebies, and then we get to B15, which, quite similarly to B11, had a right-hander followed by a drop into a ring checkpoint. I was quite worried when I first saw this, as B11 was already problematic enough, but luckily the ring drop turned out to be easy, and the rest of the track was as well. And with that, the green series was successfully done. The blue series started off very gently, with 2 easy finishes in CO1 and CO2, but then immediately kicked things into high gear with CO3 Acrobatic, where I really thought my journey would end. You see, CO3 Acrobatic has a quarter pipe jump to the right that is 5 blocks wide, and since we can't steer to the right, we don't even stand a chance of making it across. But there was a saving grace. A lucky coincidence. The scenery on this map is 4 big inflatable platforms that surround the track, and I noticed that by jumping hard left in the quarter pipe, I could get on top of one of them. And then from there, I could make my way over to the inflatable on the other side of the track, and from there, I could drop down into the finish. But things were not getting any easier. The further you go into the Trackmania Nations Forever campaign, the more advanced the tracks become, and that means more big jumps, more loops, and more tough corners. And the next track, CO4 Race, had all of these things. The track actually didn't seem that hard at first, since you could get checkpoint 1, 2, and 3 by simply following the normal track route. But on checkpoint 3, you reached a dead end with this corkscrew loop, which is impossible to get past since you can't get enough speed. So I tried looking around in the free camera to see if there was any way I could get from checkpoint 3 to 4, or even just get to checkpoint 4 in general without using the corkscrew. And after some searching, I did find a way, but it wasn't going to be pleasant. Behind the first checkpoint, there is a curved wall part floating in the air, and if you were to land on it, you could drive across on it to these scenery blocks, and then from there you could gather speed and drop onto the platforms and drive them to checkpoint 4. However, I decided to change up the order of the checkpoints because I wasn't sure that the jump to the finish straight at the end would be possible from checkpoint 4. So I started out by taking checkpoint 3, then going back to checkpoint 1 and attempting to land on the rail. This was a bit of a grind, but it took way less time than I expected, and after only 7 minutes of trying, this happened. I got a perfect rail landing, and now all I had to do was slowly make my way over to the scenery block, then drop onto the platform, and I had cleared the hardest part of the track. And now from checkpoint 4, I went to pick up the final checkpoint, checkpoint 2. So how exactly did I expect to finish from checkpoint 2, which is halfway across the map from the finish block? Well, this was all according to plan. Checkpoint 2 was actually the perfect starting point for going outside the stadium and gathering speed for half a lap around it. Then once I went back into the stadium on the other side, there is a small elevation change that when you hit it with 500 kilometers an hour will cause the car to bounce up high, and it just so happens to be towards the finish. With just a few attempts, I managed to finish CO1 in 11 minutes total. Moving on, CO5 was easy. CO6 was just barely possible by the skin of my teeth. In the middle of the track there was a jump that, with 2 good wall hits beforehand, you could just barely get enough speed for. But after that, it too was an easy map. The next interesting track to mention really is C10 Acrobatic, which has a normal way that I believe is impossible, but one that I didn't try much because there is a way easier shortcut on the track. I went backwards on the start, did 1 lap around on the floor for speed and to get the line up, and then I jumped up the ramp and bounced on the scenery to land in the finish. C11 was also very interesting. For one, the very first jump on the track wasn't possible, but I was able to get around this by doing a little mountain hiking. Once I'd gotten to the first checkpoint, I then followed the normal way all the way to the end, where I realized that the last jump to the finish road was also impossible. But this one was a bit trickier to get around. I looked for a solution, and at first it seemed like simply going back to where I was mountain hiking earlier, gathering speed, and using this dirt hill to make it up to the road wasn't that bad of an idea. But after some minutes of trying, I saw that the angle needed was really hard to get, and I eventually found something much better, just using one of these ramps like I'd done on C10. Funnily enough, the attempt where I made it, the car actually landed upside down on the road, but I was still able to turtle, still only steering to the left, and flipping the car back onto the wheels to finish the track. Next up on C12, I discovered a game-changing trick. I noticed that when braking and turning to the left with under 40 speed, the car would be turning to the right. Not much, just a little angle adjustment while it was still rolling forwards. To make things easier, I'm going to be referring to this as the angle trick from now on. C14 had an interesting detail on the start of the track where there was a loop I didn't have enough speed to clear normally, but the loop is covered by scenery blocks on both sides, and by lining up precisely I could jump and land on the scenery blocks and then drop down to the following checkpoint. Since this track is a multi-lap, I had to do it 3 times in a row, but I got to the finish in the end. C15 was another relatively easy map, but here you really get to see how useful the angle trick is. It basically gave me the ability to always steer to the right, though only at very low speed and in small portions, but it made tracks like C15 way less iffy to play, as I could always adjust my line. And with C15 out of the way, I'd completed the first 45 out of 65 tracks in the game, only steering to the left. There were just 20 tracks remaining, and how hard could they be? Well, DO1 was a track that only turned to the left, making me able to get the author medal. But DO2 was a tough nut to crack. In the middle of the map there is a right turn followed by a jump. Even with a perfect lineup beforehand, getting every inch of speed that I could, it was still nowhere near enough to make the jump. but a lucky placement of the scenery on this track allowed me to drive around the stadium, gather speed, and bounce with this sculpture perfectly into the checkpoint after the jump. And from there, it was just one more lineup for the finish jump, and DO2 was complete. DO4 also had the right turn plus jump combo at the second checkpoint of the track. But there I had way less speed to work with, and this time there were no statues on the grass to help me out either. Just driving with good speed and getting an angle to rebound with from a wall bang wasn't enough, as I was hitting the wall too close to the end of the road and the speed loss was too great. Instead, what I needed here was a very precise hit on the left corner a bit earlier that would give my car more time to accelerate towards the jump, and then I had to hope it was enough to reach the following road. After 18 minutes of hitting a corner and hoping for a miracle, I finally had a breakthrough, and it was still incredibly close to failing. But after getting across, the rest was child's play, and I finished the track in 20 minutes and 33 seconds. DO5 was another easy finish, and on DO6 I once again took advantage of sculptures on the ground to bounce up to the checkpoint and the multilap. And surprisingly, DO7 and DO8 were also both easy. I had only 12 tracks left to complete in the campaign when I got to DO9 obstacle, but this was the toughest map yet. The main issue was the sculpture in the start, where you have to drive up the sculpture all the way to the top and drop down to the checkpoint thereafter. The sculpture really caught me by surprise, as in my mind I remember DO9 had a left turn before it, and it kinda does, but there's a slight right turn adjustment needed to go straight up the sculpture with speed. And that's where the problem lied: maintaining enough speed to get up to the top. From the start block itself I didn't stand a chance, so instead I went to the last checkpoint to give myself a better starting point, then gathered as much speed as I could, drove a lap around the stadium and through the start again, and tried to hit the wall to adjust, but it was still not enough speed. I went into the track editor to do some testing on just how much speed I needed, and I found out that with a perfect recovery on top, 430 km an hour would be sufficient to make it. But after trying again on the real map for 45 minutes, the best speed I could manage was 415, and it felt very close to the maximum I could get. And even if I somehow got another 15 km an hour and made it on top, the recovery process on the sculpture is very tedious, and it's easily failable with the added pressure. I decided that for the first time I would skip a track and go to D10 race, as I didn't know how DO9 obstacle would be possible. D10 turned out to be quite the enjoyable wall hugging simulator after playing DO9 for a few hours, and I finished the map in roughly 2 minutes. D11 was also enjoyable. I could do an angle trick on the start to go to the very right side of the boosters, then jump as left as I could onto the ramp and do a slide to land on the final platform, finishing the track in under 20 seconds. But then I got to D12 speed. In the start of D12 there's another right turn plus drop combo, which we all know and love, but luckily I could bounce on the ring to reach the road like we'd done all the way back on B11 race. Then there was an unconnected corkscrew loop, which I knew I didn't have enough speed to pass, so my best shot here was to line up towards the right and hope that the car would fall out of the loop and onto the platform below, and then flip back onto the wheels, which went all according to plan. Now I could pick up the 2 following checkpoints, and all that was left of the track was one final wall ride. But this wall ride is where the dream would end. You see, DO9 obstacle I couldn't say with 100% confidence was impossible to complete, but D12 speed really seemed that way. The wall ride at the end starts to the right, which means that I had to line up my car for the gap in advance, but then even with a perfect lineup I was getting nowhere near enough speed. I tried a lot of different ideas like skipping the wall ride, landing on top of it, or even bouncing up from the grass with one of the poles, but nothing worked. I ultimately had to conclude that D12 speed was in fact impossible without being able to steer to the right. And so to answer the question, can you beat Trackmania Nations Forever without steering to the right? Well, sadly no. But as I'd come all this way to the 57th track in the game, I decided to finish what I'd started and play through the remaining 8 tracks to conclude the journey. The remaining red tracks, D13, D14 and D15, were all easy tracks to finish. And with that, we were on to the Black campaign, and the final 5 tracks in the game. The Elite 5 of Trackmania, if you will. And first up was EO1 Obstacle, which was one of the tracks I was the most concerned about going into the project. It has incredibly high speed, and wall rides and loops that go both to the left and to the right. But I noticed that the finish on the track was very close to the roof of the stadium, which is possible to get to from anywhere on the track. So my plan was to find a route where I could easily collect every checkpoint and then climb up to the stadium roof and drop down onto the finish road. Getting all the checkpoints was fairly easy and could be done in about 2 minutes, but getting the ending turned out to be one of the hardest things of the entire project. To get up on the stadium roof, you have to drive a lap around the stadium and gather speed, and then crash into this sign and get a bounce that takes you to the ledge. But if this wasn't hard enough by itself, EO1 Obstacle has a forced internal camera perspective, meaning that as you're playing the track, your perspective will look like this, and as you're hitting the sign and bouncing up, it's almost impossible to predict where your car is going. But if you happen to land on the ledge, then you have to make your way to the back of the stadium, drive underneath 3 bridges and jump up to the left just before the 4th one. Now we're finally on the roof and almost in the position of getting 1 attempt at finishing. First we have to cross this pipe, and then the last part involves gathering a decent amount of speed and driving up on the glass and trying to reach the finish. After a total of 9 landings on the ledge, 1 hour of attempts, and a decent headache building up after playing with the internal camera for so long, I finally got this attempt. And just like that, EO1 Obstacle, one of the most skill-based and advanced tracks in the game, was completed steering only to the left. Something I was very skeptical of being possible when I started on the project. And next up in the Elite 5 was EO2 and EO3, which both turned out to be long but easy tracks. And then I got to EO4, which sadly turned out to be yet another track that was likely impossible. The main issue on EO4 is this jump right here, up to the very top checkpoint on the track, which even if you line up perfectly for, you still cannot get enough speed. There could be some creative approaches to this, but with already having failed on D12, I didn't look too closely and decided to continue on to the last track, EO5 Endurance. Out of 65 tracks in the game, I'd completed 61 of them, and I now stood before the final boss of Trackmania Nations Forever, EO5 Endurance. For those of you who don't know, this track has 60 laps, and each lap takes about a minute to complete when driving normally, meaning a full run would take about an hour to finish. But this was going to take me much longer than that, so I set my goal to just complete a single lap to see if I could prove it was technically finishable. The first problem was these 3 rings at the start of the track, which I couldn't get enough speed for. But I could drive to the checkpoint right after, and from there I just had to find a way to get the rings, and these 2 statues right next to the rings would do the trick. It didn't take me long to get a good bounce from the side of the sculpture and up on top, but I could only collect 1 ring at a time this way, so I had to repeat this route 2 more times to get them all. After that, there was 1 more tough ring to collect near the end of the track, which the best way I found to do was to bug up through the road. On these sloped roadblocks that touch the grass, it is possible to clip through the border on the side and up onto the road, enabling me to gather speed without being limited by the red freewheeling block, and ultimately, I could get the ring. With that out of the way, the remaining driving was a novelty. Gathering speed 1 final time and using the statues near the start, I could officially complete a lap of EO5 Endurance in just over 24 minutes, without steering to the right. The fact that a lap took 24 minutes means a full run should take about 24 hours. Good luck to whoever wants to try that, but I am very satisfied with just completing 1 and knowing it's technically possible. So there you have it. To summarize, can you beat Trackmania Nations Forever only steering to the left? Well, no, but you can complete 62 out of the 65 tracks, which is still a pretty good 95% success rate. Perhaps D09 obstacle and EO4 obstacle are possible to finish for the right person, but I'm confident in saying that D12 isn't possible, and because of that, neither is the game. Anyways, this was an incredibly fun project to endeavor on. As they say, it isn't always about the destination, but about the journey itself. I had a great time exploring, and I learned some interesting things about Trackmania in the process, and I hope you learned a thing or two as well, or perhaps just got a break from anything going on in your lives. But that's it for now, guys. Let me know if you have any ideas about what challenges I should try next. Until then, have a good one. Peace.